Good afternoon. Welcome to the Joint Public Protection Committee. It's Wednesday, the 31st of March, 4 p.m. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
We do not, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Bath is expecting him to join us very shortly, so no apologies beyond that.
Please let's take Councillor Bath's apologies if he's not able to join us then.
Certainly.
Next, the minutes of the meeting on the 15th of December. Are there any questions of accuracy on the minutes? Okay, nobody said anything, so...
Councillor James Cole has his hand raised, Chairman.
Are there matters arising, Councillor Cole?
It's not so much matter arising, it's just a curiosity in the printing, in that the PDF version that came to me looks pretty strange. It's something in the way it was turned from Word to PDF. So might look at that before it actually goes public on the website.
That's something I can look at. Yeah.
I
copied it back into Word and it's perfect. It's just the version that came to me over the email.
Okay.
Well, I think we're all kind of juggling different formats of electronic media at the moment, proving a challenge. But I'm sure that can be looked at. So, item 3, declarations of interest. Any member have a declaration of interest to make?
The one, all I can say, Chairman, is that Councillor Bath has joined us. I'm just waiting for his video to come on.
Councillor Bath, we've just started the formal agenda. If you'd like to take over chairing the meeting.
My sincere apologies. Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Whereabouts were you?
Well, we've just taken your apologies for absence and looked at the minutes of the previous meeting. So now we're on to item 4.
You've taken the apologies, you've taken the minutes, yeah?
Yes. And
the declaration of interests, that's where we are now.
We were just hanging on that one, yeah.
Right, okay. Well, thank you for that. You had some problem logging in. Okay, the item 3 is, can I ask if we have any declarations of interest, Stephen?
None have been forwarded to me in advance, Chairman.
Okay. Item 4, which is public questions. Are there any public questions?
None have been received.
Right. So we move over to item number 5, which is future plan, pages 1 and 2. Do you think if any members feel that they wish to move or change any of these proposed dates or move any items? There's a meeting on the 14th of June, 13th of September, that's my birthday, 13th of December and 14th of March. So are we all okay with those dates and items in there?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. In that case, we move over to item 6, which is Sean Murphy to introduce this report, and it's the PPP COVID-19 response and service. Update 3, pages 3 to 32.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so, I mean, this is, I suppose, the 4th in a series of reports. I think the first one the committee received was last June. Within the terms of the agreement, it's obviously a key accountability of the committee to keep under review performance and the work of the service. To this end, basically, this report basically deals with some of that accountability. It's not a full performance report. There is some performance and financial information in there, but the key annual performance report, which will cover Q4 and the year as a whole, will come to the next meeting in June, along with the details of things like financial outturn. So just moving to the report, I've set it out in 4 sections, really. The first bit deals with the COVID response. The second bit deals with the business as usual, the bit about the communication, then just looking ahead as we move into the next quarter, and hopefully some degree of kind of easing of restrictions as set out by the government. So from just running through the report, so from a financial point of view, we'd previously reported a higher figure around the potential losses with licensing. It's now looking like the licensing income loss won't be as high as we thought maybe it might have been at the end of the year. So we're looking at a loss potentially of around about £70,000. That's set out in the financial section. In terms of staffing, I have put in the report that we have around about 18 agency and I suppose casual temporary staff within the service. In fact, that's not 18 full-time staff. It's just the number of people. The full-time equivalent is substantially less than that. We have recently recruited to the role of Principal Officer for Governance, and my colleague Moira Fraser is on this call, and maybe at the end of this paper chair she could just introduce herself to the committee. So moving on to the service as a whole, just picking out some of the highlights. So at the time of writing, we'd received over 11,000 service requests into the service. They were substantive requests for support. Alongside that, there was a further 4,500 plus referrals, basically that come from the national system that related to trading standards. Some key figures in there are that we've had over 1,700 additional service requests that relate directly to COVID. So these break down into requests for advice from businesses, or for example, referrals from members of the public who've got concerns about the way a particular business is operating. Other highlights are the significant increase, which we've previously mentioned in relation to things like increasing service requests regarding bonfires, licensing, nuisance, and the number of matters that we refer to as well, basically in relation to fly tipping. So just moving on then into the work that we've done around COVID. In the last month or so, each local authority has been required to update its local outbreak control plan, and we have contributed to the update of those plans. In respect to the elements of the work that we do. The work that we do falls into really 4 areas. The first is around business compliance that I mentioned. So that's not just the compliance with what should and shouldn't be open, but also compliance with the guidance that's issued in respect of all the various aspects of business and the visits that we do around that. We do a lot of work around the investigation of outbreaks. Now, obviously, during the period in December through January and into early February, the number of those reports coming into the service was significant and involved a lot of additional work for the service. The third area is our involvement with local contact tracing, and we have a kind of tailored approach depending on the needs of each individual authority. So. But for example, at the moment, we now do contact tracing at weekends for all 3 authorities, as well as providing the weekday provision within West Berkshire. Each authority's got their own arrangements for that. We're doing work now basically with the 3 authorities as well to look at how the enhancement of the local contact tracing role will be delivered going forward as well. And then finally, the 4th area basically is some of the targeted work that we've done, particularly looking at different types of settings. So examples of that are including things like some of the work that we've done in care settings in West Berkshire at the request of the council there, but also in relation to things like early years settings where we've carried out work across all 3 of the member authorities of the PPP and provided advice and that to those settings. We're constantly reviewing the information that comes in, I suppose, the intelligence to have a look at the settings that are presenting perhaps a higher incidence of outbreaks and things like that, to have a look at whether there is other areas of tailored advice that we can provide to those. But we continue, as I say, with the with the investigations of outbreaks in workplaces and things like that. So since the last report in terms of compliance, so I think the last time we met was sometime kind of in December, early-ish mid-December. Obviously a lot has happened since then. So we were extremely busy through the December period in relation to carrying out compliance checks. And at one stage we were carrying out, hundreds, a month basically of those checks across all 3 boroughs. And this was to look at basically how the COVID secure environment and things like that was in place, as well as basically carrying out checks out of hours to look at things like closing times and things like that were also in place. Obviously, we went through 3 tiers in the space of about a few days in December, as you know, and we ended up basically in effectively tier 4, which became the national lockdown towards the end of December. Since then, we've continued to carry out basically compliance checks and visits to premises across the 3 authorities, concentrating on those premises where they've been identified as either common exposure points or basically where we're getting larger volumes of people. Obviously, the number of premises, the types of premises that have been open have been fairly limited. So a lot of that work has concentrated on settings such as supermarkets and things like that, and a significant number of visits have been carried out, round about and up to around about 100 a week since the January period. We continue to work very closely with the marshals in Wokingham and the ambassadors in Bracknell. In terms of West Berkshire, they've recently introduced COVID marshals and we're working alongside those. And in fact, the service actually manages those directly. And again, it's just an example of how it's kind of tailored in respect of individual authorities. There was some work around events and gatherings in the run-up to Christmas, and I've mentioned one particular gathering there, basically, which was the Lapland event over in Bracknell. And I'd say we've continued basically to provide advice and support for businesses when they've sought it. Just moving on to the business as usual element of the work that we've done. So the environmental quality team have been continued to be proactive in their work around air quality monitoring, sampling, testing of private water supplies, inspections relating to environmental permitting and various other matters relating to planning and commercial nuisance. We've done some work with Bracknell as one of the partner authorities on vehicle idling, and the report was produced for the executive there. The community and trading standards team have obviously dealt with the bulk of the service requests relating to things like domestic nuisance, as well as basically public health type pest complaints, animal warden related matters and the like. And they've continued to do a lot of work in trading standards terms across things like food standards, but also things like fraud work and everything else that's mentioned in the report. Food and health and safety team primarily been concentrating on COVID, although we have continued to do some food work throughout this period, particularly in relation to new startup businesses. And at some point, basically, we will be coming back, well, to say some point, obviously in June, we'll have to come back to this committee with a report talking about how we tend to move into the recovery phase around food inspections, where clearly now there is obviously a backlog because either premises were closed or we just weren't able to do them because of the COVID risk. Obviously, there's a bit in there about the housing team. What I would say on that is that for the first of the housing team's bulletins has been produced and is appended to this report in Appendix C. And that says a lot about the work that the team have been doing and some of the decisions of this committee, particularly around the decisions that we took back in September on housing issues. Licensing, there's an update there basically on the work of the licensing team, the concentration as well as the normal licensing work in relation to service requests, trying to support the trade through, which is obviously what is a very, very difficult time for them. And obviously basically at the moment working on the new gambling policies, but as you were aware, licensing as a policy area is outside the remit of the committee. The report sets out in a bit of detail some of the cases that have been taken since the last meeting of the committee, and you can see there's a range of things there that relate to both trading standards, housing, and other matters. But it was just to really give you a flavour of the cases that have been taken in investigations and prosecutions work. I mean by that, and then moving on to a summary of the numbers of FOIs and member inquiries and complaints that we'd received, service complaints that we'd received. So in total, we dealt with 77 FOIs in the last quarter, 27 member MP, stroke councillor inquiries, and a total only of 19 service complaints. And that is detailed basically at 3.9 of the report. I won't say too much about communication, just really there's a summary attached to the report of which includes the last members bulletin that went out to all members of the three authorities, a summary of the work around website, social media. The website continues to be a popular source of information for businesses and residents, and we continue to keep that up to date. And in the next report, you'll see also there is a bulletin, an update bulletin in relation to air quality. Looking ahead, our concentration now is on reopening and the easing of restrictions. We have a number of webinars basically set up to be run across the different, across all three authorities to provide advice to hospitality, non-essential retail and other businesses in the coming period. And we're just gearing up really for a whole quarter's worth of work in terms of compliance checks, enforcement matters and business advice generally. A key challenge for the service going forward is going to be around events. We have seen a large number of notifications of events coming into the service, and all of the events under the current rules and regulations have to be basically risk assessed. So we are receiving a large volume of risk assessments for both health and safety and COVID coming in, and obviously the Safety Advisory Group, which now very much incorporates the role of public health, will consider those in due course. That's, Chair, that committee is my kind of summary of where we've got to. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. That's a fairly comprehensive update there. Ladies and gentlemen, I can invite members to speak on the item. Does any members want any clarifications or questions for Sean? Please indicate.
Councillor James Cole has his hand raised first, Chairman.
Chairman, I thought this was a very positive report. I do have a few questions. Perhaps I might ask two or three and then defer to others. So perhaps they will ask the same as me. The financial implications, you've told us of lost income of 70,000, Sean, and extra income of 169,000. What's the overall picture likely to be?
So obviously there has been some government relief around lost income, but the overall picture, the outturn at the end of the year is likely to be an underspend. The scale of that is not yet finalised, because obviously we're on this very day, of course, we're just going into the financial close down. In normal circumstances, that money would carry forward, given the nature of the shared service, into the next financial year, which hopefully would provide some cushion again around the lost income issue. Where that underspend has come from, part of it is because obviously some of the resources have been diverted into COVID work, but there are other areas as well, actually, interesting enough, which of course are a result of COVID directly. So things like actually less spend on things like travel, which actually is going to be probably an interesting facet for all local authorities going forward, and other organisations as well. So as I say, we're just really at that. We're sometime in the next sort of 40 minutes or so, the budget will close. I will have a figure, and I'm happy to circulate that to the committee as soon as I've got the position, of course, and then there'll be a full report in June.
Okay, but that again, that sounds positive. My next question was in fact going to be on travel, because it sounds as if that likewise is going to be a success. New ways of working, it's going to cost us less. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what I would say about travel is that the as you can see from the report, obviously the officers have continued to serve the communities throughout the whole period. So there's a whole raft of work. So where officers still had to go out, everything from kind of air quality monitoring to the animal warden through to investigations and everything else. What has reduced is the travel, obviously, between offices, and we have basically developed this new way of working. And as a service, clearly, basically now having got the technology in place for that and seeing the benefits of that, that will obviously be part of our new way of working beyond COVID, if that makes sense. Obviously, it's a much more efficient working. It doesn't entirely replace the need for people to get together. But yes, I mean, I would imagine that going forward, there will be some long-term savings around things like travel.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, may I ask one more and then defer to others?
You may.
Thank you. Under 2.3, you refer to support for businesses. How have local businesses responded to this support advice that's provided by the PPP?
I honestly think that the service that we've provided to business has been, I mean, we've had to balance everything. So the approach that we've taken basically is to provide the support, the advice. I think the fact that basically so many businesses have approached us for advice have seen that they understand that the approach that we're taking is really to provide that support initially. Clearly, we've had to carry out some very small number of enforcement actions in terms of things like prohibition notices. But what I do know from the surveys of businesses that we've carried out is that the support we have given has been very welcomed. Again, perhaps when I come to the end of year report in June, I can bring some of the narrative about that from the surveys that we do with businesses, which basically give us the feedback. And I'll bring that back to the committee, if I may.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Can we move on to Councillor Terrell, please? Councillor Terrell?
Thanks, Chairman. I'm just telling me. Thanks very much. Yes, a very comprehensive report. Thank you very much for that. Just on paragraph 3.4, we mentioned on food and health and safety, and I take it really that these very unusual circumstances, you mentioned the COVID compliance. I take it it's really all been that, and to what extent has it been possible to do other visits, or what have there been other issues coming up in terms of, say, what you might call the more normal run of things, and has that affected how proactive is it possible to be in these circumstances? Has it all been reactive?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so in relation to health and safety, obviously the way that we've tended to approach health and safety and for a number of years now is basically audit based. So we work with the health and safety executive to look at very specific targeted areas around normal health and safety work. So the routine health and safety inspections of old basically have moved to a kind of intelligence-led audit type footing. Now, what we've not been able to do during this period is that program hasn't really been in place. We will be looking obviously to introduce that in due course as we work with HSE and as the key partner on that. In relation to the food safety element of it, obviously we've continued basically to try and monitor particularly new businesses opening up, and we have continued to deal with enquiries and matters of that nature that have come in. We will also, going back to health and safety, we will also have dealt with the normal health and safety accident notifications that will have come in as well, and where appropriate, basically looked into those and investigated those. I think this is going to be one of the challenges going forward in terms of where we go in terms of catching up with some of this stuff. I mean, it's obviously a challenge that all local authorities are facing, and I know that Food Standards Agency, particularly around the food work, are looking at the best way forward with that. In many respects, of course, we've probably done more health and safety visits than we've ever done in history, particularly with the COVID stuff. So although the COVID advice was there and rooted and grounded in public health controls, but of course, very much of that in terms of was done in workplaces and around the protection of staff and the investigation of things like outbreaks in workplaces as well. So I think there is a big piece of recovery work there, and I hope to come back in June with an explanation as to how we're going to start that recovery process.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Porter, next.
Thank you, Chair. I've got one question. Then, after all the questions, I'd like to come back with a comment, if I may, please. My question to Sean is: how has the health and well-being of the officers been monitored during this COVID, especially with their increased workload?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the issue of just health and well-being, just overall, basically within organisations is more challenging at this time. And obviously when so many people are working at home, we have kept up a constant route of trying to basically keep staff up to date with what was going on, explanations. So I've put out a number of staff bulletins. More recently, we've had a couple of briefings online. There's obviously been team meetings and things like that where we try to explain some of the decisions, engage people basically in the processes around priorities. It has been an extremely busy time, and a lot of work has fallen actually basically to particular groups of people within the service. Everybody's been busy, but particular groups that have been dealing with things like some of the compliance work and everything else. What we have tended to do is we have sought volunteers and things like that across the service to do a lot of this out of hours working, a lot of the weekend working. And we've tried to basically rota that to make sure that nobody basically is working too many days or too many hours throughout that period. But I think the whole issue of health and safety as people look towards the new way of working in the future and everything else and how we provide support for staff is something that we just need to constantly keep under review. You know, it's a real issue, particularly when people were trying to balance work with obviously homeschooling and all of those other issues. But it is something we very much keep under review.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Harrison, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to kind of echo Councillor Porter's sentiments there, because I think it is worth noting staff working for our council through the Public Protection Partnership have really risen to a challenge over the past year with a huge amount of COVID-related work. And that's all on top of the usual business of dealing with trading standards licensing, helping me to clear up air quality in Bracknell with our new policy on vehicle engine idling and lots of other stuff as well. Great work. So I'd like to say a big thank you from Bracknell Forest. So Mr. Murphy, would you convey those thanks to your staff in the partnership, please?
Absolutely, I will. I suspect a number of colleagues I know probably were watching the meeting, but I will make sure that I convey that back from yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think Councillor Cole, James Cole, you just put your hand up again. Yes, please go ahead.
Remember to unmute myself. Thank you, Chairman. May I echo that last comment on behalf of West Berkshire? We too think that the staff have done a fabulous job over the last 12 months. A couple more questions. You've given us an update on the BAU, COVID and recovery section. Do you think demand levels on the PPP are actually going to drop when we get to the end of the government's roadmap?
It's an interesting question actually, because obviously at various points in the last 12 months, there's been a cycle really of how inquiries. So we reached the point of January where effectively inquiries kind of stabilised, but at each point basically there's been a cause and effect. So if you look at back in last March, the 23rd of March, when lockdown started initially and the tips were closed locally and things like that, we had all of those bonfire complaints. We had the domestic noise nuisance complaints. We had the inquiries from businesses for whom all of this was basically unfamiliar territory. And then obviously throughout then we've had periods of perhaps lower numbers and a bit more stability. And then basically the rules have changed and the inquiries all go up again. And that's where we are now effectively. We're waiting for the next significant rise of inquiries. And there's always been a kind of new nuance which has led to further inquiries. So an example of that back in December would have been the whole substantial meal debate. Now basically will be another debate that will be taking place. I mean, what's interesting is, of course, is the overall significant number of inquiry, the significant rise in the number of inquiries of 30-odd%. actually comes with a backdrop where in fact inquiries in certain areas have fallen. So I actually had those inquiries, for example, in relation to, and I gave a couple of examples in the report, things like food safety and things like this. Had those been at normal levels as well, that figure would have been even higher. In answer to your question, I just don't know. I suspect basically there's going to be more rule changes, more guidance changes. Am I thinking that May is going to be it, June the 21st is going to be it? I suspect basically we'll be living with some degree of inquiries, risk assessments, rule changes, guidance changes for some time yet, and we'll continue to have a role in that. So ask me again in June how it looks.
Just a question of keeping on top of it.
Yeah. I mean, at some stage, of course, that's going to buffer up against the need to go into recovery, full recovery. And that's when obviously basically the resource challenges are here now, but that will exacerbate some of the resource challenges as well. And of course, at the other side of that is at some stage the funding to support some of this additional resource will dry up as well. So there's a lot to think about there going forward. Okay,
Chairman, my last batch is on the subject of fraud and social media as well. Sean, you've given us some examples of PPP anti-fraud successes. You've given us an update on social media. We were a little bit slow on social media, as I remember it at the beginning, but certainly West Berkshire is keen to hear about the PPP. We see it dropping off in the figures. Why? What happened more recently? And perhaps it's part of it. Can you describe some of the feedback you've had from the victims of fraud that the PPP has actually helped?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the victims of fraud, one of the things we did actually basically a few years back now, I suppose I can't remember exactly when, but probably 2 or 3 years back, we introduced initially on the back of the some of the proceeds of crime money, actually a support officer for victims of fraud. Now that role has developed over time and has become quite successful, as the report indicates, in not only supporting the victims of fraud, but helping them to recover some of their losses and preventing further losses. So that doesn't just include the traditional areas that we started looking at, so things like the scam mailings and that type of stuff, but also the online frauds, the telephone frauds, and examples of that would be, where we fitted, for example, call blockers. And I'm pleased to say, in fact, recently we've just been awarded basically some, as part of this work, actually some things like doorbell cameras and that we're going to be able to fit it as well, basically as part of the response to fraud. I mean, there's a lot of examples of the type of thing that we've had, but we've had some substantial sums recovered. Three. I mean, I've got some examples basically that I pulled out. So sort of 10,000. Another example here, basically somebody recovered 19,600. So these are substantial life-changing or can be life-changing sums of money for some people. And the other thing that we've learned a lot over the, certainly over the last few years is the really serious impact of fraud. And I was talking about this actually, funny enough, at Health and Wellbeing the other day, but the impact that financial fraud and financial abuse can have on people as well, basically. So we do an awful lot of work with, for example, social services, safeguarding teams and things like that to try and basically to get the right level and other providers of support as well to try and get some support for victims.
But are we shouting about this over social media?
We certainly put out a lot of information around fraud, and to be fair to, it's also picked up, a lot of it is picked up by the local media, and I think I alluded to that in the report. I mean, the one thing we are fortunate is that the local media do run a lot of these stories and get the warnings out there. A lot of things like radio interviews and things like that. I mean, I feel like I'm fairly regularly talking on radio about the latest fraud. So I mean, an example of that would be the Royal Mail one that's in the national news at the moment. We did a radio interview and that's been picked up locally. But yeah, I mean, we try to be proactive as well. So I mean, we will be returning. So as well as just responding to kind of allegations, and I talk about fraud, I'm talking about everything from doorsteps crime to scams. we will be going out again, basically, and teaming up with the police and doing some very proactive patrol work and things like that to looking to identify potential perpetrators, but also basically to protect the interests as well of local businesses, because actually, the public aren't the only victims of these frauds. Businesses as well are another area that we find ourselves involved with.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I've just noted Councillor Porter has put his hand up. Do you want to ask another question?
Not a question, Chair, just a quick comment following on from Councillor Harrison and Councillor Cole, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. COVID-19 has put many pressures on society as a whole, and many residents and businesses have relied on our PPP to give correct advice to them, but also take the appropriate action where breaches have occurred. The PPP has shown great resilience during COVID, and our officers have shown great adaptability, and in doing so have shown that their cogs within the PPP provide a mighty machine that members, residents and businesses should be very proud of. The services which are provided by our excellent and dedicated officers have demonstrated during COVID that they are flexible in their approaches. And Sean, could you please pass on our thanks on behalf of residents, businesses and members within Bracknell Forest Council for their dedication and hard work. It is much appreciated.
Absolutely, I will. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed. Are there anybody, any other questions from anybody? Stephen, I can't tell.
No, there are no other hands raised.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Fine. I think we will need a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations of page 3. Could I have a proposer, please?
Councillor James Cole.
Yeah. Yeah. And a seconder, please. Stephen, would you like to read, Councillor Harrison, second, do you want to read the recommendations?
Yes, as a proposal that the committee note the role that the PPP are playing across the councils with respect to COVID-19 response. But the committee also notes the status of non-COVID related service delivery, including the Q3 performance report. And further, the committee resolves to receive a further update at its June meeting on progress and priorities for the coming year, including recovery. Members can show their hands in favour of that recommendation. Yeah, that's a unanimous approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And before we leave this item, can I add my personal thanks to Sean and the team for your very hard work, Sean, and forbearance in this very challenging times that we're going through at the moment. Thank you very much indeed. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item 7. It's PPP DEFRA grant funded air quality project, and that's I can invite Anna Smythe to present the report, please, Anna.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'm really pleased to be bringing this report to committee for your information. So back in October 2020, the Public Protection Partnership applied for funding from DEFRA for their air quality grant scheme. And it's really just to let you know that we've been successful in obtaining the full grant amount, which is £259,000. The committee are asked to note the information provided about the project in the report and how the PPP plan to deliver it. And in addition, you're asked to note that the project update report will be provided to the Joint Committee in June 2022. This will provide an update on the first year of delivery. In addition to the project, I've included a copy of the air quality newsletter, which sets out the work the team are doing. And as Sean's already mentioned, they've continued to deliver during lockdown. And this has given us an opportunity to look at the impact changes in traffic levels have had during this time. And the team are working to reflect on what lessons we can learn from this. So sort of liaising with highways officers around what the traffic flow was doing at that time as well. And see if we can put anything in place more permanently, perhaps. So back to report itself, we're currently expanding the details of the project plan and looking to submit a report to the West Berkshire Procurement Board before looking at a supplier for the monitoring equipment and the service with that that's required. That does make up about 50% of the budget that's been awarded. In addition, there is funding for an officer to support the service in delivering significant elements of the work, and this will be supported by colleagues in the environmental quality team. And the joint management boards will be updated on progress, and there'll be a project board with input from each authority. So as you'll be aware from reports that I brought to committee on pretty much an annual basis, the air quality across all three areas is generally good. There are localised areas where the pollutant nitrogen dioxide has been identified as above the government's air quality objective, and we found it necessary to declare air quality management areas. The action plans which result from this provide cross-council solutions to improve the local air quality. However, these are based in or adjacent to the air quality management areas and don't necessarily look at the three boroughs as a whole. So due to their locations, they're also focused on traffic and vehicle related measures. So the grant will enable us to look at wider than the existing scope of monitoring, contribute not only to local issues, but the wider national clean air strategy as well. We currently monitor in one unit in Bracknell for particulate matter 10. This is the levels that we've got there are within the objective levels that are set by the government. What we're doing within this project is monitoring the pollutant particulate matter 2.5, and these are the very small particles. They're coming up to less than 2.5 micrometers, so about 200 times smaller than a grain of sand. So absolutely tiny, and these people can breathe in, they can get lodged in the lungs, cause irritation, and some researchers even found them in other parts, other organs within the body. So this is really sort of, I suppose, pollutant of concern that the government as well are looking at. The range of sources is wider than other pollutants such as nitrogen dioxide, although about 12% is contributed from road transport. There's things like tyre, brake dust and tyre debris and things like that as it gets broken down. That would be included in PM 2.5 as well. Levels nationally have been relatively stable since 2009. So things like nitrogen dioxide, there has been with improved vehicles and greener fleets and things like that, there have been some natural reductions, whereas with PM 2.5, this is sort of plateaued almost. At the moment, we've only got indicative maps that are created through modelling to help us assess the implications in our area. And these suggest that probably the highest levels of exposure are between about 11 and 12 micrograms a metre cubed. To put that into context, the World Health Organization have an ultimate goal of achievement of 10 micrograms as an exposure level. And currently they suggest that 92% of the global population already exceed this level. But the government are also looking within the Environment Bill at setting some interim objectives for the local authorities. So we expect to see that coming in this year, the end of this year or next year. So the project will focus on behavioural change and in particular around schools, as that's the children obviously are in a more vulnerable group, again to do with the size of particles they can be exposed. Those with asthma could be affected, and also it can, it's seen from studies in London, it could affect lung growth as well. So those would be in and near our quality management areas. However, we need a broader picture of exposure levels. So we're also going to be looking at schools in other areas, and that will be led more around the data around intelligence. And we will use the extensive monitoring programme to look at the measured levels before, during and after any interventions that we put in place. And the projects that we're looking at and some of the behavioural change work that we will do is set out in the appendix around kind of competitions and promotional work and information and the idling projects. So on the idling, we're building on work already in place, and as Councillor Harrison mentioned, that Bracknell have looked at and put forward not only the anti-idling campaigns, but also around emission testing, and work's going on in the other two authorities, and in Woking, we should be seeing some signs going up and some low-level enforcement starting around schools to do with idling as well there, and also in our in the newsletter that we've enclosed and out on social media today. There's lots of photos and information around the banners that have started going up in schools. That was a result of the clean air competition that we ran. So again, we're building on that work. So there's already a lot going on, but this project will allow us to have a funded campaign to grow that as well. So in addition, we'll start to work more with some of the teams that are involved in schools already and ensure our work links in with them where possible. Project presents an opportunity for us to actually be proactive around this and set out our plans to tackle air quality issues before we're required to do so with the Environment Bill. And it gives us a clear baseline position which can support transport planning teams, public health and other teams in providing the appropriate services to protect residents, businesses and visitors to our area. So just to sort of go back, it's really to note the information provided in around the project and the newsletter, and also just that we will be bringing an update report in June next year to sort of let you know how things are going. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That's a very, very interesting report. I'm sure members will want to have some questions. Can I ask members to put your hands up, please, and can I invite, first of all, Councillor Bowring, please, to ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just thinking about electric vehicles, Anna, and as more become available, replacing polluting diesel and petrol cars. Do you have any idea of how that will affect the level of pollution, particularly in these troubled areas where we have high rates of pollution?
With regard to sort of nitrogen dioxide, the predictions and estimations are that as people have, as there's more electric vehicles around, the levels will start to drop off. With the different pollutants, though, with PM2.5, as I said, there's a lot of other sources. It's naturally occurring, Saharan sands, sea salt, all sorts of other issues with it that aren't necessarily traffic related will still continue. So we would expect with certain pollutants to see improvements naturally happening as said, as some of the older diesel cars go off the road and the sort of vehicles change. They do predict that we'll get improvements naturally, but for other pollutants we might not see that change.
I don't know whether you're actually monitoring the traffic to see. Not sure you can tell whether a car is electric by glancing at it, can you? I'm not sure.
No, sorry.
Oh, is it possible to, would that be a useful statistic if you could tell whether they were electric, to see how things were going?
We do use, when we do our annual status report, we look at what the traffic breakdown is, whether it's heavy goods vehicles or cars or motorbikes, so how it's made up. When we look, then there are projects around that do sort of companies and nationally, they will look at what percentage they estimate the fleets to break down to be. So you could make an estimate of, we know that nationally 10% of vehicles are electric. So if we applied that locally, we would know roughly how many were, but we don't have that specific data.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Hilary Cole, please.
Thank you. It's more of a comment really, Anna. I think the more work that you can do in schools with children will help to affect the behavioural change that you are seeking to achieve, because children do go home and do influence their parents, and I think that is a good untapped source of getting behavioural change to be effective. So more work that you can do with children in schools about this will be good.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, please ask your question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, on page 35, there's a table assessing various things. One of the lines is health impact. And perhaps you could help me understand what the statement opposite that means. It starts that this is a neutral area.
Sorry.
I'm confused
so,
as,
yeah,
as to the meaning of that sentence.
Sorry, I've gone to the wrong table.
Yeah,
so just my way of describing it. So essentially, we've got to look at whether there's a positive impact or a negative impact or a neutral impact on the three. So really, I've said it's a neutral area because there will be some health benefits, hopefully, from improvements that we can make, but there might be other more negative impacts, obviously, if we are identifying that it is PM 2.5 affecting their health, and perhaps we're not able to make the improvements we would like to see. So it's a balance. So there are negative, and so I've come to the conclusion it's a neutral. Does that help?
Sort of. Does that mean that, okay, that it's useful to have the information, but by giving out that information, I don't quite see how that would be a negative if we become aware that there's an issue? Is it just we can't do something about it if it's PM 2.5 because a lot of that's naturally occurring?
We may reach that point where we know that there is a health impact on, we've identified that the levels are, say, above the objective. And so we know there is going to be a health impact. But yes, if we might reach the point we can't actually, we can only do what we can do as the authorities to control it. And if it's naturally occurring, then we might end up with residents who do have a health impact, but that is beyond our control.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Porter, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to heap praise on our officers for obtaining such a fantastic grant from DEFRA, which will hopefully lead to more initiatives to get cleaner air for all our residents. So I'd just like to thank all the officers for their hard work that they had to put in to get that grant, and very well done.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, it's Councillor.
No. As this,
I just noticed on.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Sorry, Councillor Clara, please go ahead.
Okay. On page 47, just a note on the Bracknell Downshire Way, equipment having to be turned off because of the dualling roadworks. Am I right in thinking that apart from that, all the other monitoring has gone on uninterrupted through 2020 and COVID? So actually, we do have a very clear picture across the piece in terms of what's been happening.
Yes, we've got the Forte graphs relate to the continuous monitoring units that we've got in place. In addition to that, we have, I can't remember what the number is now, it's about 120 odd locations where we monitor just monthly data. So that will back up this data as well. So yeah, we've got a very comprehensive set of data that we've collated over the lockdown periods, really.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Councillor James Cole, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Very quick question. My reading of this report was that it feels like a success, and it feels like success benefiting all three councils. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, it will be. We'll be looking at schools across all three areas. We've got, as I said, we'll be looking to get data across all three areas and look at where we can work together. So obviously we've got one air quality team that can deliver that for each of the areas. So we're working with each of the, so we've got separate highways teams, separate transport teams. So we will be the kind of bringing best practice and learning from each of the three authorities as well. So we know what sort of projects have worked well to support what we're doing in each, and we can use that to work with the other teams as well.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. Well, as this item's for information only, and therefore there's no need to take a vote on this, and therefore the report has been noted. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Finally, the item number 8 is the future of the Public Protection Partnership, outline response to Woking and Borough Council's decision. Paul, I take it you're going to present this report?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
So hopefully the report is fairly self-explanatory, but I'll highlight a couple of the key elements. Obviously, the announcement that came out from the executive decision this month is something that the Joint Management Board needed to consider. What I've tried to do on behalf of the board is provide a outline of our thinking and to make sure that we're kind of sending out the right messages and the reassurances about where we are right now and what are our next steps. Obviously, there's quite a lot of sort of technical and legal elements to consider as part of this decision, and what we've used the template to the report template this evening is really just to start shining some light on the, if you like, on the corners, the darker corners of the inter-authority agreement that we all signed up to in bringing the public partnership, public protection partnership together. It is a for information report, so there's nothing to decide this evening. But again, it is important that we at least set out the scene of the work that needs to be done and where some of the indicative costs are going to start shaping out. So you'll note from the report that I've tried to provide some context and some scale to the early indications of what we think might be needed, and obviously more work will be needed to do to firm that up. Principally, the three councils are working in partnership to make this a positive experience wherever possible. Inevitably, there will be some discussions in the future where there will be slight differences of opinion, and we need to make sure that there's a clear process for managing that. There are inevitably risks associated with this journey that we're going to need to travel on, and the timescales for this are going to be all important. One, because it's about minimising disruption to all parties, minimising disruption to the staff, and making sure that hopefully we minimise all the risks that have been identified as potentially plausible as a result of the decision. Invariably, the outcome of this process will be to define the terms of how Woking want to operate their service moving forward, and to make sure that West Berkshire and Bracknell are clear in their position about how they wish the partnership to move forward beyond the time at which Woking exit. I think hopefully it comes across as clear that the communications and the relationships, certainly in terms of managing this process, are strong and clear, and the communication to the staff is going to be imperative to the success of the service in the longer term. I guess there will inevitably be further papers that come through to the Joint Committee, because the Joint Committee is still has the strategic oversight for the service on behalf of all three authorities through the delegated authority that was given when it was set up. And a lot of that will be around understanding the project planning, the staff that inevitably will need to be involved, and also to make sure that we manage and mitigate any of the business as usual risks, given everything that's been discussed in the reports preceding this one. So I guess at this stage, what I would say is we've set out the principles that we would like everybody to subscribe to, and that to acknowledge that in the future, more detailed reports, possibly with decisions to make, will come through to the Joint Committee, notwithstanding the fact that we will respect that each individual partner authority may well have to, in fact, they probably will have to take those decisions through their independent individual decision-making and government structures. and then we'll try and join it back together again through the joint committee. So hopefully the report reflects that, shows the thinking, and takes us on a positive step forward, given what we're responding to.
Well, many thanks, Paul. As I can open the floor now for any questions or clarifications that members may have. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you. Just trying to find the unmute button there. Yeah, I think from the perspective of Bracknell Forest, we were kind of expecting that the Woking Borough Council were going this way. We've got full confidence in the talented staff of the Public Protection Partnership, and not just that. I think in the common sense of having a partnership structure, because so many of these roles are very specialist and hard to source, it just makes sense for local authorities to work together. It's unfortunate for the staff that they're going to have to go through a period of uncertainty. But I do think with a bit of common sense and goodwill on all sides, we can resolve this. And I hope we can sort this out fairly quickly so that we've got some clarity as to how we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Hilary Cole, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just would like to say that I think we in West Berkshire are disappointed that Wokingham are leaving the partnership, but we do understand the reasons for that. And I agree that we need to work during this transition period to make the transition as smooth as possible, both for Wokingham, who are leaving, and the remaining partners, West Berkshire and Bracknell Forest, who are staying in the partnership. And I believe that the 6 months transition period is sufficient to enable us to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Councillor Porter, please.
Thank you, Chair, but I believe Councillor Cole was before me.
Well, okay. Switch over to Councillor James Cole, please. Thank you.
Happy to take it. I support what my namesake Councillor Hilary Cole has just said entirely. We need this to work smoothly. I have only one question. I note Wokingham's budget of 500,000. I note a lack of detailed figures as to what it's really going to cost. Do you have a gut feel yet as to whether or not that 500,000 is going to be adequate?
Short answer is no. What I would say is that the process, as it's mapped out in the agreement, what we have to do is establish what was termed direct losses, and the management of the costs from staffing levels to equipment to accommodation through to any organisational change and project support. All of that will need to be looked at by the nominated officers. So let's, for argument's sake, say it's the Joint Management Board as a three representing each of the individual authorities. What we'll need to do is establish where there are costs that we can reduce or mitigate now, which prevent future or increased losses further down the line. And then secondly, if there are sensible ways of manoeuvring in terms of organisational change, because obviously it goes without saying that staff is a fairly significant cost in the overall balance of the budget for the PPP. We'll just need to be flexible and mindful of where there are staff that can be reasonably deployed across the three authorities based on the requirements that Wokingham put forward in terms of what kind of service they choose to offer in the future. And then in terms of how we shape the overall cost of the project, I've tried to give in the report an indicative cost based on similar projects. I think it would be unfair to say that I've got direct experience of ever doing this type of project before, but we've done similar, certainly in terms of building them. So if you reverse engineer it, there are some costs in there. And I think, again, we're working on, but the working assumption at the moment is that we can do something in that 6 month period. But as has been demonstrated with other complex projects, sometimes it goes beyond that. So there'll be some costs that will probably need to flex depending on how long it takes for us to do it. But at the moment, we know what Woking and we're trying to achieve. And if we find any costs that come along as a result of that, we'll have to have a grown-up conversation about how to apportion those costs.
Thank you.
Right, and finally over to Councillor Porter, please.
Thank you, Chair. I try to be a gentleman at times.
You are.
I'd just like to concur with my previous colleagues that it is a shame that an authority has decided to leave the PPP, but Bracknell Forest do believe in the public protection partnership, and it does provide a great efficiency to all our residents and businesses. So we still fully behind the partnership, and we look forward to working with West Berkshire going forward to continue providing a great service from our great officers.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Porter. Any further questions from other members? No. So as Paul has already said, that there's no decision to be made on this item today. It's for information only. The report covers the information. There's no need to take a vote, and therefore the report is noted.
Thank you.
And that concludes our business for today, ladies and gentlemen. And I thank everyone for their contributions. And that's absolutely marvellous. And with that, I can close the meeting.